Hi guys, today we're going to be talking about simplifying, multiplying, and dividing rationals. This is Unit 3, so let's get to it. So simplifying. So our instructions are to simplify each rational expression and list any restrictions. Well, restrictions, that's a new term or a term that we need to go over. To define restrictions, we need to define what that means. So that is the excluded values. So that is values that make the denominator 0. So that's what excluded values are. So your steps are to factor the denominator if possible and set each factor that contains a variable not equal to 0 and solve. And what that means is you're just, instead of like putting an equal sign, you're going to have an equal sign with a line through it. All right? So when we have simplifying rationals, we're going to take the variables or constants and set them over each other so that we can simplify them. So I'm going to kind of do our first example in 3 steps. So say we have 15 over 5 multiplied by x to the third over x, and then we have y over y to the third. So for my 15 over 5, well, I know what that's going to be. 5 over 15, that reduces to 1/3. And then when we have x to the third over x, it's like we are subtracting the exponents. So say this is actually going to be x to the third minus 1. Well, that turns into x squared. And then the same thing happens for our y over y to the third. We have y1 minus 3. And so we have y to the negative second. So my last step would be to rewrite my fraction, if it's still a fraction. So we have 1/3, so we have it, it's going to be over 3. I'm just going to move this down a bit. So it's going to be over 3. And then we have x squared on top because it doesn't have a denominator. And then we have y to the negative second. Well, if you remember, when we have a negative exponent, that just means it's going to go into the denominator with its exponent. So we have y to the second on the bottom. So that would be my fraction. And then my last step is to list my restriction. So to find my restriction, I'm going to set my denominator, so this guy, equal to 0, or not equal to 0. So if we solve for y, we would have y squared not equal to 0, and then we have y cannot equal 0. So that's my restriction with my fraction. All right, so now let's look at example number 2. So this one's a little bit different. So we have a minus sign in the bottom and in the top. So my first instinct is to take out any GCFs that I can see. And I can see that I can take a GCF out of the numerator and the denominator. So if I'm going to look at these terms, so I see that I can take out a z squared from both of these terms. And so I would rewrite it, so z squared times w minus 1. And then if I look at my denominator, I can do something similar as well. I can take out z to the third. So I'm going to do that. So we have z to the third, and then 1 minus w. So now we can simplify, and it makes our lives so much easier. So like before, I'm going to match up my terms, and I can see that my z's turn into something like 2 minus 3. So now that's going to simplify to z to the negative 1. So that tells me we're going to have 1 left over in the denominator, and everything else will be the same. And you might be thinking, Miss Smith, well, you can take out that w minus 1. Well, I can't because they're not the same. W minus 1 and 1 minus w are not the same, so we can't simplify them. So from here, we're going to set our variables not equal to 0. So for z, not equal to 0, so that's one restriction. And then w. So 1 minus w not equal to 0. So that tells me that w cannot equal, if you subtract 1 and then multiply by a negative, positive 1. So we have a restriction at 0 and a restriction at 1, and this is my simplified rational. For this third example, I want you to try it by yourself, and I'll show you the answer after this. So pause the video here and try this third example. So if you figured this one out, you had to notice that you needed to factor your 49 minus z squared. And then when you do that, you see that you get negative z plus 7 and z plus 7. Well, those z's plus 7s simplify, so then you get negative z plus 7 in the numerator, 1 is in the denominator, so there is no restrictions because there is nothing in the denominator or no variables in the denominator. So let's move on to multiplying. So now we're going to multiply rationals together. So for this one, I'm going to go ahead and multiply everything. So you just multiply straight across like elementary school. So we have 4a times 15b. Well, 4 times 15 is 60, and then ab all over 5b times 16a. 5b times 16a, that is going to be... Right, so let's move on to multiplying rationals. So first, when we look at this, I want to have the factors of my numerators and denominators listed out. So for a, we have 2 times 2a. 5, well, 5 is a prime number, so we're going to leave that. 15b, well, that's going to be 5 times 3b. And then 16, I'm going to do 2 times 8a. And the reason we're doing this is so that we can cancel things out before we even multiply. This will make our lives so much easier. So if we look at this, I can see that my a's will cancel, my b's will cancel, 5 will cancel, and 2's will cancel. So I'm left with 2, 3, and 8. So I'm going to move on and multiply by a cross, and I have 2 times 3 over 8. Well, if you notice something, 2 and 8 have a common factor as well, and that's 2. So I'm going to simplify this again, and I'm going to have 3 over 4. So just by canceling things out, we made our lives so much easier when we were multiplying, and we only had to do one extra step, but you could have noticed that even before that, and I kind of made a mistake. So, if you see it before I do, call me out. So for this one, we're going to move on to example number 2. We're going to follow the same process, so we're going to factor these first. With these quadratics, that is so important. It makes your life so much easier, and you're not trying to go to x to the 4th or anything like that. Having your factors first will make it so much easier. Please do it first and not, move on to x to the 4th. So I'm going to go ahead and factor these, and you can too. So pause the video and factor. So if you factored correctly, you should have all of these on your denominator and numerator. So now we can go ahead and cancel. So I'm going to start right here. So when we're canceling, we have to go to the diagonal numerator or denominator. So we have this left numerator, so we're going to go to the right denominator. So I see that they both have x plus 3 in common, so those are now canceled out and nothing else. So now I'm going to go to x minus 5. Well, I'm going to go to the right numerator. So x minus 5, I see x minus 5 and x minus 5 cancel. So now I'm going to rewrite, and nothing else will cancel. So I have x minus 2, x plus 5, and x plus 1. So from here, I would expect you to now find your restriction. So remember, we're going to set our denominator with a variable not equal to 0. So we have x plus 1, so we have x plus 1 not equal to 0. So solving for x, we have x cannot equal -1, and that is our restriction. So here's the third example. I want you guys to try this on your own first, and then I will show you the answer. So please pause the video here, and then I'll go over it for you. So if you did this one correctly, this is what you should have gotten, and the restriction is at 4. So something funky kind of happened with this one, and that was that you could simplify your x minus 4s in the original fraction. So that's something that you need to be aware of as well. If you can simplify something in the original fraction first, that would be great. So that makes it a lot less work for you. But yeah, so that is multiplying. So let's move on to dividing. So dividing is a lot like the process of multiplying, but we have one extra step. So that one extra step is that we have to do keep, change, flip. So we're going to keep this, we're going to change this to a multiplying, we're going to flip that. I like to think of it as KFC, but the chicken is before the fried. I don't know. But we have 3x to the third over 5y squared multiplied by 5x to the negative fifth over 6y to the negative third. And then you're thinking, Miss Smith, there are negatives in my exponents, so what does that mean? Well, it means we're going to have to flip them again. So we're going to go like this. So that -5 means that we're going to go to the denominator, and that -3 means we're going to go to the numerator. So we're just doing another flip-flop. So we have 6y to the third and 5x to the fifth. All right, so now we're going to do that same process of simplifying using that diagonal pattern and canceling some things out. So I first noticed that my x's can simplify, and they're going to simplify to x to the second because we have the leftovers on the bottom. And then same thing happens with my y's. So I have my leftover on top this time. And now I'm going to look at my numbers to see if they can simplify at all. No, none of my numbers can simplify, so I'm going to multiply them. So I have 3 times 6 is going to be 18, and then 5 times 5 is going to be 25. All right, and then last but not least, we set our restriction, so we're going to have 25x squared not equal to 0. And when you do your math, x cannot be 0. So that's what you get for your answer. So for my second example, we are going to factor and flip. So I want you to do that by yourself, and I'll show you what it's going to look like. So you might have known as Miss Smith. Nothing really cancels except for in the originals. Well, so we have x minus 3 canceling itself out, and also our fraction just cancels out. So that was already a 1 in the first case, but it's always good to factor and then do everything before you automatically cancel that out. So now I want you to rewrite your rational. You rewrote your rational, you should get that. Now find the restriction on your own. So you should have gotten a restriction of -4. Now move on to the you try it, and you try it on your own. So you try it if you don't have the notes. So if you did this correctly, this is what you should have gotten. Please be careful of that 4 minus x squared, and you should get restrictions of 2 and -2.